What are formal fallacies or deductive fallacies? Formal fallacies, also known as deductive fallacies, arise when the structure or logical form of an argument is flawed, leading to an invalid conclusion regardless of the truth or falsity of the argument's premises. Unlike informal fallacies, which often pertain to errors in reasoning related to the content, context, or rhetorical elements of an argument, formal fallacies strictly involve errors in the logical framework that underpin deductive reasoning. The validity of a deductive argument is determined by its form. Therefore, even if the premises are true, a formal fallacy renders the argument invalid because the conclusion does not logically follow. Formal fallacies typically occur in deductive reasoning, where the validity of an argument is based on its adherence to specific logical rules and structures. Deductive arguments often rely on syllogisms, which are logical constructs consisting of two premises and a conclusion. A valid deductive argument ensures that if the premises are true, the conclusion must necessarily be true. When the structure deviates from these principles, the argument fails, regardless of the accuracy or relevance of its content. To provide context, formal fallacies often emerge in academic, philosophical, and policy debates where logical rigor is paramount. They are significant because they undermine the integrity of an argument, creating a false sense of validity that can mislead or confuse audiences. Recognizing and addressing formal fallacies is essential for maintaining the logical consistency and credibility of discourse, especially in disciplines that rely on sound reasoning to draw conclusions. A good example of a formal fallacy is the affirming the consequent fallacy. This fallacy occurs in conditional reasoning when the structure of the argument is flawed. Antecedent: if it rains, the streets will be wet. Consequent: the streets are wet. Conclusion: therefore, it must have rained. While the premises may be true, the conclusion is invalidated not because it is true or false, but because the argument assumes only one possible cause for the wet streets. There could be other explanations, such as a street cleaning operation or a water main break. The error lies in the structure, which improperly affirms the consequent or the second statement as evidence for the antecedent or the first statement. Another common example of a flawed deductive fallacy is the denying the antecedent fallacy. This occurs when an argument improperly concludes the negation of the consequent based on the negation of the antecedent. Antecedent: if it rains, the streets will be wet. Consequent: it did not rain. Conclusion: therefore, the streets are not wet. This argument is invalid because it ignores other possible causes for wet streets, much like the previous example. The structure of the reasoning is flawed, leading to an erroneous conclusion. A third example is the fallacy of the undistributed middle, which occurs in categorical syllogisms when the middle term is not properly distributed across the premises. Premise: all dogs are animals. Premise: all cats are animals. Conclusion: therefore, all dogs are cats. The middle term, animals, is not distributed in a way that connects the two premises to justify the conclusion. The argument is invalid because the structure fails to establish a logical link between dogs and cats. Formal fallacies underscore the importance of logical structure in argumentation. The presence of formal fallacies in an argument undermines its logical structure, rendering its conclusion invalid, even when that conclusion happens to be factually accurate or intuitively compelling. In fields where decisions, policies, and beliefs have significant consequences such as program design and implementation, especially in contexts of sustainable design and development, the reliance on invalid reasoning introduces substantial risks. While the content of an argument may align with reality, the flawed logical structure means the argument cannot reliably support its conclusion, making it incapable of guiding effective and rational decision-making in the design or implementation of sustainable program development. In program design and implementation, particularly in initiatives related to sustainable development. Decisions are often complex and systemic, requiring a balance of environmental, social, and economic considerations. Introducing conclusions derived from arguments containing formal fallacies compromises the intellectual foundation of these decisions. An invalid argument, even if its conclusion aligns with desired outcomes, fails to provide a verifiable basis for why the conclusion is true. This lack of foundational rigor renders the reasoning unreliable, which undermines the program credibility and long-term efficacy. Without a robust logical framework, stakeholders cannot confidently assess the reasoning that informs critical decisions, which may lead to a lack of trust, skepticism, or opposition. Moreover, when formal fallacies shape program reasoning, they introduce inherent vulnerabilities into the decision-making process. These vulnerabilities arise because the faulty logic creates gaps that can be exploited or misinterpreted. If a program's design or justification is based on invalid reasoning, subsequent elements of the initiative such as resource allocation, strategic priorities, or operational goals, risk being similarly misaligned. For example, a program designed to address deforestation might argue that if reforestation programs are implemented, carbon dioxide levels will decrease. Therefore, all successful environmental programs must include reforestation efforts. While the conclusion may seem reasonable, the reasoning contains a formal fallacy, as it assumes reforestation is the sole or primary determinant of carbon dioxide reduction. Implementing programs based on such reasoning can lead to misdirected efforts and the neglect of complementary solutions, such as protecting existing forests or reducing emissions through alternative strategies. Formal fallacies can also have a cascading effect, distorting the broader framework of sustainable design and development. Programs based on invalid arguments often lack adaptability, as they do not rest on sound, defensible reasoning that can withstand scrutiny or adjustment in response to evolving conditions. When such programs encounter challenges, their inability to provide robust justifications for their methods or priorities impedes course corrections and fosters inefficiency. This inflexibility can derail broader efforts, eroding the coherence and adaptive integration necessary for systemic sustainability. Additionally, introducing invalid reasoning into discussions of program design and implementation carries the potential for broader harm. The reliance on unsound arguments can foster complacency or overconfidence among stakeholders, as they may mistake the appearance of validity for actual intellectual rigor, likely stemming from confirmation bias. This misperception can lead to the proliferation of similarly flawed reasoning across related initiatives, compounding errors and inefficiencies. Furthermore, reliance on fallacious reasoning can provide opponents of sustainable development efforts with grounds for critique, as they may highlight the flawed logic to discredit the entire initiative, even if its goals and methods have merit. The potential dangers of formal fallacies extend far beyond the immediate scope of sustainable program design and implementation to the larger context of systemically sustainable human growth and development. Achieving any viable level of systemic sustainability requires collaboration, trust, and a shared commitment to evidence-based practices. When formal fallacies pervade the reasoning behind programs, they hinder the establishment of common ground, as different stakeholders may identify and challenge the flaws from varying perspectives. This disunity obstructs consensus building and viable problem resolution, which are essential for advancing shared goals and promoting long-term sustainability. Finally, the reliance on invalid reasoning jeopardizes the overall integrity and credibility of sustainable development efforts. If a program's conclusions are invalidated by fallacious reasoning, even if those conclusions are factually correct, the lack of logical rigor can alienate critical stakeholders, including funding resources, policymakers, and the general public. Once trust in the reasoning underpinning a program is eroded, stakeholders may become skeptical of the institute itself, as well as any other initiatives, regardless of their validity. This erosion of trust is particularly detrimental to efforts aimed at fostering sustainable practices, which depend on widespread participation and support to succeed. The introduction and allowance of formal fallacies into the reasoning behind program design and implementation undermines the reliability and efficacy of conclusions, even when those conclusions are factually accurate. These fallacies compromise the ability of programs to adapt, gain support, and effectively address the complexities of sustainable development. By failing to address and eliminate formal fallacies, stakeholders risk creating initiatives that are not only ineffective but also detrimental to the broader goal of fostering systemically sustainable human growth and development. Recognizing and addressing formal fallacies is, therefore, an indispensable aspect of ensuring sound reasoning and successful outcomes in sustainable design and development. Armed with a clear understanding of formal fallacies and their implications, individuals can actively engage in more rigorous and effective reasoning, fostering intellectual clarity and credibility in their discussions, debates, and sustainable program designs.
Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Music by Hatman.